Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Stephanie Raffelon.
And I'm David TheYear.
And you're listening to Yak About Today. This is a place to hear conversation, gain insight, and perspective from the mouths of baby boomers. That's us. If the years 4664 means something to you, then this is the place that you want to be. So put on your headphones, go for a walk, and listen to what we yak about today.
Okay, Steph, I'm listening.
Okay, so David, I'm glad you're listening. We have a year. What's our year?
We have 1965, but we have currents first.
Oh, we do. Okay, we have currents first.
That's right. You know how we used to do the show every week?
Yeah,
Currents
I sort
first?
of remember that.
Okay, so...
Hey, I have a great current event this week because I am so wanting good news. I am so hungry for the positive. And I found this fabulous news story about a guy that you may not know. His name is Sadio Manet, and he's from Senegal. Now, I'd never heard of his name, but he's a soccer player. He's what the Europeans call, they're playing football. And here's what he says about the millions and millions of dollars that he's making every year. This touched me so much. Why would I want 10 Ferraris, 20 diamond watches, or 2 planes? What will these objects do for me and for the world? I was hungry and I had to work in the fields. I survived hard times, played football barefooted. I did not have an education and many other things. But today, with what I earn with football, I can help my people. So he has built schools. He's built a stadium. He provides clothes, shoes, food to people from Senegal who are in extreme poverty. And he's just my hero this week. Manet, that's his last name. And what a guy, and what a great piece of news in a world where we're having trouble, coming to terms with, our freedoms and giving up our freedoms and all this other stuff. This is a guy who just has it wired. He lives from his heart. And I was so excited to read that news story. I texted it out to a dozen of my friends.
I'm always amazed when people who make it really spend their time giving back to the community. I'm a big tennis fan, and Rafa Nadal is, in this house, held up to be a god. And one of the things that I especially appreciate about him is very similar. It's similar. I'm not sure he's gone to the extent that Manet has, but he's number one in the world, and he's got riches, and he does buy things, like he bought himself a yacht, the Beethoven, but he comes from Mallorca, right? And everything is about the family in Mallorca and the town's people, and he has no intention of ever leaving it. People go to Monte Carlo and all around the world, they establish residencies, but he stays in Mallorca. And it's all about helping the community. He set up a big tennis center to teach people how to play tennis, So it's always extraordinary when people give back to the community. It always makes you feel a little guilty, that even within our capability, we're not stars and we're not, the giant money makers yet. And and I keep thinking, when you hear stories like that we need to do more to give back to the community. I think it's why I set up the podcast network, or the podcast company, to help, not-for-profits use podcasts to distribute their curriculum, their information, because it's an inexpensive way of doing things. And I'm hoping the podcast company takes off so we can help a lot of communities. But I'm in awe of those stories. And I hope people, you hear stories like that all the time. And I hope people don't get bored with those stories. You know what I mean? Whenever you hear about somebody giving back to the community, and there's another one, and then there's another one, we should appreciate the buildup of all these people instead of going, okay, I've heard it before.
Well, you know what? During these times when I turn on the news, there's just so much that's negative and divided and painful. And so this story inspired me. And it inspired me to be a better neighbor in whatever way I can be, to just practice kindness. Little kindnesses make a difference in somebody's life. And this guy, of course, practices a big generosity of spirit, and we can all learn from him. So that's my current event.
I'm glad you picked that. You're raising the bar on the type of things we have to do on this show. But it's great. All right. I guess we'll take a break now because we have the great sponsor, New Vision. And when we come back, we have a year, and the year is 1965. So we'll be right back. I'm David Yakir with Stephanie Rafalak. You're listening to Yak About Today.
I want to take a moment to talk to you about New Vision Eye Center. For the last couple of years, they've been a sponsor of this show, and I couldn't be prouder. I've met so many people that have walked up to me and thanked me for recommending them. I hear all sorts of stories about how they've worked miracles. And as you know, I've been a patient of New Vision Eye Center for years. So when I say go see Dr. Minotti, Reinauer, Tate, and O'Brien, it's because I wouldn't trust my eyes to anyone else.
All right, we are back. I'm David Yakir here with Stephanie Rafalak, and you're listening to Yak About Today, and we're going to talk about 1965. What took place, or how do you want to do this? Okay, so little things. So new house, $13,500, 1965.
Wow.
A new car, $2,600. Okay, so significant events. I'm seeing that the Watts riots. That was L.A., right?
That was L.A.,
Were you living there at the time in 1965?
No, I wasn't in Los Angeles until 1969.
All right. The next one is interesting. It was the Northeast blackout. St. Louis, Missouri built the Gateway Arch. Pretty famous now.
Wow.
Now the cultural part, of course, I'm always attracted to that. Dr. Zhivago was the big movie. Topping
God,
the
I
charts.
love that movie, Dr. Zhivago.
Oh, yeah.
I loved the clothes in it. I wanted to be like, Natasha and the big fur hat and the fur-trimmed stuff. And, I don't know if her name was Natasha or not, but I remember loving the costumes in that film.
Okay, popular musicians. Number one would be an easy one, I think. The Beatles.
Beatles.
Of course. The Rolling Stones, number two, of course. Freddie and the Dreamers. The Animals. Love the Animals. The Kinks were popular then. I think the Kinks are the most underrated group. Their lyrics are spectacular. They were spectacular musicians. In fact, when I was living in London, my mentor, Ned Sherrin, had written a script for the Kinks that we were going to direct, but it never came together. Anyway, so I think that's the year events. Your recollections?
Well, in 1965, I was 13 years old. I was very curious about making out. And I was in love with the Beatles. And I remember
Paul, if I remember.
Well, Paul, definitely. But I would have taken any of them if they'd shown interest.
Not discriminate. It's okay.
Lyndon Baines Johnson was president.
Mm-hmm.
And Vietnam was just starting to heat up. And I remember that because my mom was really concerned. Now, in those days, at 13, I was going to the ballet studio 3 to 4 times a week. And what I remember about going to the ballet studio was I got to ride the bus there by myself and home. And I felt very, very grown up. And a TV show that started in 1965 that I loved called The Monkees.
Oh, yes. Me too.
We all wanted to watch the Monkees. We all wanted to be the Monkees. It was really kind of a precursor to what MTV would later become.
Right.
But I remember that just being a very fun time. So that's what I remember about 1965. I certainly wasn't very socially aware or politically aware yet. My world was small, but I loved my dance classes. And like I said, I was very curious about making out.
Okay, because we have time. So I wasn't sure how I was going to talk about 1965 until a friend of mine up north somebody I grew up with. We were bestest friends. I guess we still are. His name is Andrew. He still lives in Brooklyn, where I come from. He had reminded me that I was a product of the Catskills. And he thought it was interesting because they used to go to the beach every summer, but I would go visit him and he would come visit me. And he was reminding me about the environment in the Catskills back then, which is quite different than what it is today. It was a very Jewish enclave of sort of upper, lower class, probably, lower middle class people. And what was interesting is the setup. There used to be old, like houses that would have rooms, and the rooms were turned in originally to rentals. So when I first was very young, we would go into like a one room, and there would be a bed next to a bed, and my parents would sleep in one, and I would sleep in the bed next to them until my brother was born, and then they got two rooms. But the kitchen was in the same room, the bathroom, it had a little one of those fiberglass little showers that you could barely fit in. But the bungalows themselves, I guess they were like cabins. The people who didn't have money would go into the more rickety of the bungalows, but they were perfectly fine and they were clean. But there was a whole lifestyle there that he reminded me of. It was a bungalow colony, and our bungalow colony was sort of lower middle class, I guess. I'm not sure. But it had an environment where the kids hung around the pool, right? And the men would just play cards and pinochle, and they'd shout, hey, Solly, why'd you get that head? And they would be screaming, and the women would be sitting around. A lot of knitting, I remember, and the kids were in the pool. We would go any place into the woods, and we'd get lost in the woods, and we'd just have to look. We were always taught to look up at the sun to know where the sun is, type of thing, so we could get home. There was the casino. The casino was not a casino like we think about, today, Las Vegas. It was a room, and it had a little stage, and they'd bring entertainment, and all the adults. Sometimes they blacked out the window so the kids couldn't see in, and they'd have a stripper, and they would have like a bottle of scotch, and the men would sit there and have a little, what are the thimble glasses called? A whiskey glass.
Shot glasses.
Shot glass.
Yeah.
And they would sit there and they'd take one shot, and the men would go, whoa, I'm drunk, hey, this is a great time. And they'd have these strippers, and that was the adult. And we used to hang out there during the day, or we try to sneak in, see what was going on. We even had a cross-dresser show once, and I was in the window while she was preparing and showing us our outfits and all that. And I guess that was one of my first experiences with the LGBTQ plus community. Anyway, I don't know how to describe it. It was an extraordinary life because you were free. You went on hikes. You would disappear.
Yeah. And it was a lot of pleasure for a little investment. It wasn't like one of those $10,000 vacations that people took. Right. And in hearing you talk about this, I've heard my husband talk about this because his very first job was as a busboy, or I should say one of his first jobs, was as a busboy up in the Catskills.
Did he tell you what hotel he was a busboy at?
I have to ask him what that was, but he has a similar description of, what it was. And the Jewish people are not known for being big drinkers.
No.
And he tells a story about his mother, and a little bit of Manischewitz. And she was like, whoa, I'm so woozy.
The owner of the bungalow colony's wife, about midnight, after 1.5 drinks, would be carried out every Saturday night.
Oh my gosh.
But you're right about the non-drinking. I mean, when they did have a drink, it was, barely a glass.
Yeah, barely a glass.
And
with big effects.
Right.
Big effects for such a small amount.
We're going to break now. We're going to have only a little time to do this. But let's take a break, and we'll be right back.
Don't talk back.
So, Steph, I've been thinking.
I want to know what it is you've been thinking.
So
Lay it on me.
I will, and I think it's going to be surprising, but I have been thinking. So I've been thinking about a conversation that I had with one of my neighbors, and at the end of the conversation, it sort of led me to think how confused I was about politics and policy. So let me say up front that I probably have no right to have this conversation I'm about to have, but sort of honestly, I've had a few conversations I really should have in the past. So as most people who follow us, they know that I hold policy views that range from centrist to sort of left of center. And the neighborhood I moved into 6 years ago leans decidedly right and Republican, although quite frankly, I've never said it to them, but I've always had a sneaky suspicion they just pull the lever because that's what they've been doing since Reagan. See, the conversation, and this I think is the serious part, I had with my neighbor was right after the Supreme Court ruled that businesses or organizations have the right to not cover birth control in their insurance coverage if they object for religious and ethical and moral reasons. So my understanding of these organizations are that they're pro-life and that contraceptives are a form of preventing life. Here, my politics are easy. I mean, the politics of a lot of people in the center and toward the left. I wish no one had to have an abortion, and anything we could do to prevent one would be great. But in no way should we ever interfere with a woman's right to choose. It's a simple policy decision that I've made. So here was the dilemma and the confusion. My neighbor seems to think that the decision by the Supreme Court that was championed by the right was a win for the pro-life movement. I thought it was a loss for the pro-life movement. You see, for me, birth control and the right to access birth control for everyone, especially those that can't afford it, would prevent more abortions. And I'm pretty sure that would please most people. So here's my question to anyone out there who's listening. Am I more pro-life than my right-wing brethren? So that's the topic I picked today. So a little surprising, I think.
Wow, that it is surprising.
So go ahead.
I have two comments. One comment is that if men could get pregnant, we would be having an entirely different conversation.
Absolutely.
And number two is, I'm just curious about this. Does insurance pay for Viagra? Is that something that people don't disagree with? Because if insurance pays for Viagra, then, maybe I have a moral dispute with saying that, that causes promiscuity. So it becomes this very dicey road when you start setting what you think is supposed to be a moral standard for one person. And yet it seems different on the other side. There's always like a little element of hypocrisy that I note in the pro-life movement. Like you, I'm not a fan or a proponent of abortion. At the same time, I will not interfere with a woman's right to choose. And there are a lot of other religions worldwide that believe that life doesn't start at conception. It starts at birth. So you can't prove one or the other, really. Does it start at conception? Does it start at birth? So I resent the Christian interference, the theocratic interference with a woman's right to choose. That's where I'm at with it.
No, and I think on the substance, we totally agree. And I don't really know how to make sense of it. Because as far as the Viagra is concerned, I remember it not being covered. And the reason it wasn't covered, it was considered a play drug.
Okay.
And not necessary. I heard there was a movement to cover it, so I really don't know where it stands today. But the reason I brought up that topic is that policies, I don't know, they seem to make no sense people are pro-life, but they're pro death penalty.
Death penalty, right.
So I don't know how people rationalize, and this really, if it was a conversation we would have on a regular basis, I could pick out dozens of policies that keep turning upside down, depending on who's defending it for what reasons.
Yeah, I mean, at their best, I think that government policies should be about the structure and function of governing, period, structure and function. Unfortunately, what's happened in the last 50 years is there's been all this morality stuff that has crept in that doesn't really have to do with the structure and function of government. And it puts government in a bad position, and it puts people in an awkward position thinking that their morality should somehow be legislated and foisted upon everyone. What if my morality is different? What about my rights? So I understand the idea of wanting to protect life, and I think that the pro-life movement would fare far better were they to put a big emphasis on push on how we care for young children in poverty in this country. What do we do for life in that regard? It's not really fair. George Carlin used to have a routine about, boy, we're just going to protect you while you're a zygote or you're, in vitro. But once you're born, hey, screw you, kid, you're on your own.
Right. That's right.
And so, my ears would perk up a bit more, and I would listen a lot deeper to the pro-life movement were they to demonstrate some real caring and concern and advocacy for children too young to have a voice when it came to things like education, good meals, clean water, safe neighborhoods. That would make me sit up and listen.
Well said. But that's all we have time for.